So when I started to look at this phenomena, of course I had to embed this question within some research literature, and I positioned it basically around this question of what can we learn about innovation from different. The claims that there's the kind of innovation that's happening in regions of the world, particularly low-income, middle-income countries, but also across different sectors such as housing, transportation, healthcare, certainly, microfinance, for instance. So the whole motive was to just analyze these different cases positioned within the framework of social entrepreneurship and see what we can learn about it. So, describe emerging markets. This was a terminology that Antoine Vactac-Mel, who worked at the World Bank, came up with this word. And basically what he said was these are countries that are transitioning very quickly and consistently towards becoming. So the most famous of these emerging markets are the BRIC countries: Brazil, Russia, India, China. And Goldman Sachs also refers to the next smaller emerging. You'd like me to speak louder? Okay. Yes. The microphone. Let me just put the microphone here then, perhaps. Thank you for that. And so looking at these different regions, there's a lot of optimism out there in the business community to suggest that we can capitalize on this growth globally for alleviating, making people certainly more wealthy, but also for alleviating poverty. With all this growth and opportunity, however, there's plenty of challenges as well. So the challenges that I saw within these contexts were broadly these three challenges. That one, you've got resource constraints or scarcity in terms of how much you can put into your innovation process. And then at the other end, it's also about resource scarcity in terms of the market affordability of the consumers or end purchasers to actually afford these outcomes from the innovation process. And thirdly, since these countries are transitioning, they're growing, they're learning at the same time, they have institutions which look very different from the institutions that we are accustomed to here in the West. So either these institutions are underdeveloped, or these institutions do not exist, or that these institutions are extremely complex through which rely on different traditional means of resolution that we are accustomed to here. And these can be both soft and hard institutions. So hard institutions being infrastructure, roads, ports, electricity, water, sanitation, but these can also be, very importantly, the soft institutions such as governance, laws, regulations, standards that enable an efficient market economy to function. But again, with all this growth and opportunity, there's a lot of businesses in the West and in the developed countries that are seeking to, as I said, capitalize on this growth and sell their products in the emerging markets. So this is a picture of a Mercedes that's probably owned by a newly minted entrepreneur in India. But however, I mean, I selected this picture mainly because look at the context in which the Mercedes is driving. It's a dirt road. So the hard institutions aren't in place for these products from the West to actually function effectively and efficiently in these contexts. So on the other hand, if you look at the business tycoon Ratan Tata, one of the major private firms in India, he looks at transportation or mobility and says, well, for the most part, most of our people ride on bicycles or scooters or rickshaws, and it's not uncommon to find a family of 5 actually being transported on an old Vespa Piaggio scooter. That's unsafe, of course, but it's not very comfortable as well. So he poses the challenge to his engineers to come up with a car that is affordable and safe for the vast majority of middle-class families to be able to afford. So he wants to enable people who can buy a scooter to jump to the next level and be able to afford a car. And then I think this is really what was a big trigger point for the concept of frugal innovations. So I think in around 2007 Geneva Car Show, they showcased this car, which looks, design-wise, I think pretty impressive, but very affordable as well at about 2,000 UK pounds. And then there was a book written on this called Nanovation, which basically said how a little car can teach the world to think very big. So there's something different happening, or there's different arguments about what innovation can come out of these contexts, but also what how this innovation is done. But it's not just done at the large business unit level. It's also done at the grassroots level by individuals. So this is an Israeli engineer who's basically developed this, as portrayed in The Economist magazine, a bicycle which is made out of cardboard. It's recyclable, it's extremely robust, and it's affordable at about $12 US. But then there's also, as I said, social entrepreneurs, people who are looking to make the world a better and more equitable place for everybody. And then, of course, the Nobel Prize laureate Muhammad Yunus with his microfinance, which he started off in the 1970s to provide microloans to groups of women so that they can become more economically self-sustaining. And then, including social entrepreneurs, there are regular entrepreneurs. These entrepreneurs are looking at what resources, not just what resource scarcity or what constraints are in these environments, but what are different kinds of resources that are abundantly available. So rice husk in the rice developing areas of South Asia. So they look at these areas and say, well, can we provide off-grid electricity to villages using rice husk as the resource? Okay. So this company is, I think it's worth, started off in 2008 or something, and it's probably worth many, many millions now. So it's a different concept of how to provide electricity away from the large infrastructure, heavy distribution models we have here to more decentralized off-grid electricity power generation that's managed and operated by those rural communities. But then there's also these networks of communities that get together and look at a problem which sometimes we call a wicked challenge, which has no starting or end point, and you don't know where to start tweaking it so that you come up with optimal outcomes. But they look at, for instance, the homelessness problem around the world. And they pose a challenge to engineers, designers, investors, philanthropists to just come together and think about how can we build a house for $300 US. Okay. And so looking at all these phenomena, there's been growing literature around this, which started off with the terminology of jugaad innovation, which is basically means improvisation in Hindi, or bricolage in French. And so it's about how can you think more frugal and be more flexible and be able to innovate very, very quickly to deliver upon the urgent needs of your society. And then there's this concept, again around the same time, written on reverse innovation, which basically says, okay, so you innovate in low-income, middle-income countries. If that innovation is promising, what needs to be done in order to bring that innovation into the more developed context? So that's a reverse process of innovation, which is different from the one that we've basically experienced about innovation being done in the developed context and then slowly and gradually diffused into lower income countries. So, And then thirdly, then of course, is the one that I think the one that we've discussing here is frugal innovation, which is essentially how can you do more with less. And I contend that we need to add one more dimension to that, which is how can you do more with less for many more people. So it's really about scalability because of the context of the affordability and poverty and the huge inequalities that exist in the world in order to enable more people to have access to things that we are accustomed to. So going back to this fundamental question on what is frugal innovation. When I again started to research this and I started to ask my respondents about what was the kind of innovation they were doing, I think it's very difficult for them to tell me what was frugal innovation, but certainly they were very forthcoming in telling me what frugal innovation was not. Okay? And they explained it to me this way. They said, look, generally what we've been led to believe is that if you want to increase the performance of your innovation outcome, you are naturally going to experience associated costs. So one side you might have cheap products which are low performance, low cost, but on the other end we have the other option is high performance at high cost. And they said they were deliberately and intentionally trying to position themselves in this quadrant of very high performance, equivalent to the high performance, high cost solutions out there, but at a fraction of the cost. And I said, well, is that possible? Can you actually do that? And so one of the companies that I used as my case study developed this knee joint. So they looked at this. I can give you the context about it in greater detail during the panel discussion. But they basically said, look, at one end you've got knee joints that are very expensive, certainly very high performance, but these can only be afforded by, say, for instance, the US military for their veterans. But if you look at the Jaipur knee, which is a social enterprise in India, they have to rely on these low performance and low-cost knee joints. So can we provide them with something that's high performance but equivalently low cost so that they can make life much more comfortable for their patients? And so they came up with this $20 knee joint. As then you can see, it nicely positions itself in this quadrant which one would otherwise think was going to be impossible. And this was identified as one of the top 50 best inventions of the year by Time magazine. Other examples in healthcare specifically that we have encountered and that we are continuously studying as our part of our research is this is an ultrasound or an ECG machine that we find in high-end hospitals, which are very expensive, bulky, and very sophisticated technology. But then GE comes up with this electrocardiograph machine at a fraction of the cost, which is very user-friendly and enables less skilled health practitioners to be able to use this in the village remote areas. Then there's the example of the cardiac surgery by Devi Shetty. And so this is a very renowned process model of cardiac surgery, which is a fraction of the cost that you would incur in the United States, but has equivalent or even better outcome rates than, for instance, the Cleveland Clinic. Okay. And then there's the Aravind eye surgery model, which was written about as the greatest business case for compassion. So it's not just about making money. It's not just about innovating in different ways, but it's also alleviating poverty and making people have access to the same things that we have access to. And then, there's other models that my colleagues will also refer to, but you can see how it's transitioned from the Aravind process model of cataract eye surgery to now we're studying peak vision by our colleagues at the School of Tropical Medicine, and they're using iPhones and smartphones with attachments that can take images of your retina, which are good enough for health practitioners to identify and diagnose ailments and diseases of the eye. So, and then there's finally this example of using technology platforms that are evolving with the help of our engineers that Professor Burney alluded to. So 3D printing is being used, for instance, in Palestine by doctors who otherwise cannot import stethoscopes or other medical equipment during times of sanctions or war. And so they've come up with this 3D printed stethoscope, which is as good as the most high-end one, but it's only about $1 or $2 cost. So to give you a starting definition of frugal innovations, I think you have to think about in terms of means and ends, that is in terms of inputs and outputs that are affordable. You should be thinking about doing more with less, using techniques that help you to be more efficient, so which requires that you might have to adapt the innovations for those specific contexts. And finally, it's most importantly, it's also about for many. How can you enable these innovations to scale up very, very quickly in order to resolve the issues that these emerging markets or lower income countries face with their populations? So it has to be very accessible and scalable. So means and ends to do more with less for many. So I'll end with that, and I think the main takeaway is that whatever terminology you use, if it's frugal, grassroots, reverse, jugaad, innovation, and there's going to be a host of other terminologies I think you and us are also going to come up with as we continue our research. But the most important thing to remember is that there's a different kind of innovation that is being talked about, and this innovation is challenging our prevalent assumptions around how innovation takes place, why it's done, and how it's made scalable. Okay. So that's where I'll end as food for thought. And I will now invite Matthew Prime to present to you some of his research on how we can identify and measure or observe these frugal innovations.